Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Lon Strickler. Lon is a Fortean researcher, author, and publisher of the syndicated Phantoms and Monsters blog. His research and reports have been presented on various television segments, including the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Sci-Fi's Paranormal Witness, Fact or Faked Paranormal Files, and Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America. He has written 7 books and is currently the host of Arcane Radio on the Paranormal King Radio Network. Lon, welcome. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for taking the time to join us. I got some fun stuff for us to talk about tonight. Legends of these cryptid beings that you investigate have been documented throughout history, and today with cameras and the internet, we can share the information easier, and in some instances, we can even capture glimpses of some of these beings. I've always been fascinated with these legends, and I believe that there are much more to them than just legends. I thought we'd start with what got you started doing this.
Well, I got into the paranormal by accident, I guess. When I was 8 years old, I realized I could sense spirit energy. I lived near the Gettysburg battlefield, and I used to spend a lot of time there as a kid. So one summer afternoon, I guess the cards were right, and all of a sudden I was experiencing a lot of phenomena. And that's when I really knew. I had a thought that I may be, but that's when I knew that what I was experiencing was real. So, it's not like I was raised in a haunted house or anything, but this is something I've had ever since. It kind of waned a little bit as I reached adulthood, but later on it started to sharpen again. And I've been doing investigations now since the mid and late 70s. So I got involved in the cryptids after I had a Bigfoot encounter back in 1981, and I investigated that, and I thought that, that'd be something I can add on to my my paranormal research, and it's kind of taken over most of what I do now.
Very good. Now, would you mind sharing us possibly one of the paranormal experiences you've had as a child that kind of led you down your path?
Well, that day in particular, that day it happened, I was in an area of the battlefield that's called Bloody Valley. It's an area between Little Round Top down into the valley near the wheat field and Devil's Den. And for whatever reason, it was a really hot day, and I just started hearing a lot of popping and large cannon fire. Started smelling gunpowder, saw apparitions. I mean, it was during the daytime, so it was really bizarre. And, I have been on that. In fact, I did tours on that battlefield. And every once in a while, something would pop up that, I would see an apparition or something strange would occur.
Now, what was your first investigation like? What kind of got you started doing that?
I got involved with a case in an area called Porter Siding, Pennsylvania, which was, it was an area in a rural area that was near the Lake Marburg Dam, where people had been seeing and hearing all kinds of strange phenomena. So this was in 70, oh God, I forget, it was 78, 79. Anyway, I took the access road with 3 other people. We went down there in the evening and started going through the area where people were reported seeing a blue haze and hearing a few strange sounds and such. So we got out of the car. It was fairly cold. It was in February, and there was a little bit of snow on the ground and such. So we went down and started into the valley and started looking around, I was trying to sense energy and, you know, what I could pick up. But quite frankly, when we were down there about 3 hours, and we really didn't find much. So it was getting later, and I guess it was getting closer to midnight. So we all went back to the car. The four of us are in the car. I was driving, and we were sitting there, and I don't know, I guess we were just smoking a cigarette or drinking coffee, but we were there about 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, the guy sitting beside me said, "Look at that, what's that?" And I had my headlights on, and what we saw was this full body apparition of a Negro woman. And she had old clothes on and had a bandana wrapped around her head. I mean, it was obvious that it was a slave. And she kind of walked towards us and got as close, I'd say about 25 foot, then turned and suddenly disappeared. So that was pretty interesting. That was kind of, I had seen full body apparitions before, but as far as in an investigation, that was kind of the first one I had seen.
Now, you've investigated plenty of hauntings. What would you say are the different types of hauntings that occur? And I know it's not just human spirits that can haunt a location.
Oh, it's a lot of things. I mean, people talk about evil, demons and such. You know, evil's evil in my mind. But these spirits or imprints they kind of just stick around for whatever reason. I'd say most of the spirits are human spirits, are remaining spirits that stay into this earth plane for whatever reason. They died suddenly, or it's intelligent enough to feel that it needs to stay and watch someone or not finish with business. And of course, you also have these poltergeists, which are a thought form type of entity. And that usually is because of someone who is in the location who's projecting this entity without their knowledge. It's an unconscious entity. But it can turn into a very, very strong entity and can cause a lot of problems.
Now, some hauntings... Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Some hauntings can be brought about by negative energy. Is that right? If there's like a lot of turmoil going on in the household or wherever the location is that something you found?
Sure, that can happen. That can happen in any situation. Family dysfunction is a big reason why there are hauntings. Like I said, that can either be this an entity, a human entity, or a past human life force that's picking up energy because of the dysfunction, or an illness, or something to do with someone who is very weak in the family, or it can be caused by like I said, a poltergeist or some type of thought form that gains energy.
Have you dealt with anything that required exorcism?
Yeah, one case I did, and it was that was a long time ago. It got to the point where I just really couldn't deal with it anymore, and I was advised to go ahead and have the client go and refer to a priest. Unfortunately, they never could find a priest or anybody to do any of the work, so they eventually just moved.
Could you tell us a little bit about what happened in that situation?
Well, it was basically it was a really bad haunting, but some of the problems associated with the worst problems were smells and a lot of noise. I mean, a lot of noise. And at first I thought it might have been a poltergeist, but I mean, these were two elderly people, and I didn't believe it was any type of thought form manifestation. And it was really causing problems with the one gentleman because he was ill. He had a disease, and it got to the point after several weeks where I just suggested they get somebody to come in and see if they could, get rid of it. It was fairly evil. I wouldn't say it was a demon, but it was strong enough that at that point I couldn't do anything about it.
What types of entities other than, human spirits or poltergeists have you actually dealt with when it comes to hauntings?
That's about it, to be honest with you. I haven't had any that, were associated with anything else but a human entity or a dead human entity or a old life force or something that was manifested. I mean, of course, you get animal spirits, but, those are fairly benign.
When it comes to exorcism, there are some beings that I guess you could say don't respond to exorcism, possibly because they are entities that are older than that certain religion that you're trying to utilize. Is that correct?
Yeah, it just depends. Thought form manifestations, poltergeist, they're hard to get rid of with any type of deliverance or exorcism. These are situations that usually have to take care of themselves, or that the person who's actually doing the manifestation is able to control themselves and control the emotions that eventually just fades away. I guess if you get in a situation where it is really, really causing a lot of problems, I guess the exorcism will work. But honest with you, I have seen exorcisms, and I really don't know if they do that much. I'm not a very religious person. I'm very spiritual. But as far as the dogma and involved in religious rites and such, I can either take it here or there.
Now, I understand you did remote viewing. How was that involved in your investigations?
Well, it would help to designate what was really going on. I have used remote viewing for a lot of different situations. Earlier, I did it for hauntings and poltergeist situations, but in recent years, I've been working with another team out of Australia who have been friends with and used to work with, but they have done several remote viewing sessions for entity involvement, or for the most part, cryptids.
Do you find that when you're using remote viewing, that you're actually seeing things in real time, or is it somewhat like a past experience? How does that work?
It can work a lot of different ways. I mean, you can go into real time, or you can go into a future period, and not too long after, but it's not too long before, but it can work that way. I've been involved with a few personal remote view sessions with clients where I have been able to sense things that would probably happen, and a few of them have.
And you also have, I guess, precognitive abilities. I guess you could say somewhat psychic. Is that right?
What you call an intuitive or cogsentient. A clairsentient. So it's a little bit like clairvoyance, but I'm able to sense some precognizance to a degree.
Now, have you ever sensed, something, a major event or anything that went on to occur?
Yeah, I have, but I'd be honest with you, I'd rather not talk about it.
I got you. Now, have you ever been attacked by a unseen entity?
Yeah, I've been attacked several times during remote view sessions by psychic energy, psychic attacks. I guess the two most serious were I was doing a remote view on an area in Prince Edward's Island. We were doing a haunting case, and I was actually doing the remote view session with a monitor, and I was literally received a laceration on my chest from my sternum down to my belly button. It required a little bit of treatment. It didn't require stitches, but I had to put a butterfly on them. And the second time, I was attacked during another remote viewing session, and what happened was I literally had my right side of my ribs bruised severely.
Do you come across that often, to where there's, violent entities that are actually causing physical harm?
It can happen. It's not a normal thing, but if you get in a situation where they just don't want you, when they sense that you're there, then they can attack.
Now, I've heard of some instances where someone may use a certain entity or spirit to actually clear another more malevolent spirit. Is this something you've used or encountered?
I've heard of that, but I've never done that before.
So you have never had any intentional communication with the spirit world or anything?
Nothing intentional. I do occasionally have something pop up and try to communicate, but it's nothing that I have really done on purpose.
Now, can you talk a little bit about shadow beings? This is something that, one of someone's in my family has encountered, and we're not sure, I'm not sure if there's ever been an answer to what exactly they are.
Well, shadow beings are kind of strange. I mean, there's a lot of reasons behind them, but for the most part, they're just predators as far as I'm concerned. They feed off misery and dysfunction. I really believe that they have nothing to do with any type of human spirit or human energy. They're manufactured for whatever reason. I have been involved in a few cases where they have turned very, very bad. I mean, to the point where I had a client almost killed because of one. They seem to just move around sporadically until they find a situation where they know that they can find energy. Like you said before, dysfunction, a child, a sick person, but it's usually, like, again, dysfunction or someone, when somebody says they see a shadow person at night at the end of the bed standing there looking at them, that's a very dangerous situation. They can draw life energy very easily, and they don't really seem to care who or what they destroy.
They're often associated with sleep paralysis. At least the family member that I have is that something you've encountered?
They can. I've actually seen more sleep paralysis cases when it comes to alien situations, alien encounters. There does seem to be a fine line in some cases between a spirit encounter or an alien or non-terrestrial encounter. It's something you got to be aware of when you do the investigation, that you're not investigating and thinking it's one or the other. You got to kind of make a distinction fairly quickly.
Now, when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, you said, that there's a lot of, it could be possibly linked to a lot of this paranormal phenomenon. Do you find that it is more of like interdimensional beings rather than physical beings, or is that something you've encountered?
I think interdimensional entities are mainly flesh and blood. I think they are able to come through a portal or some type of gateway as an actual flesh and blood being. And in fact, the situation that we were involved with in Chicago with the winged humanoids, I do believe those were flesh and blood entities that were able to interdimensionally come into our earth plane and then to quickly leave and go to where they were. As far as UFOs go, I know there are a lot of different sightings of UFOs, and a lot of times they're associated with alien beings and such, but I'll be quite frank with you. I think UFO phenomena is probably not as profound as some people make it. Occasionally, people will have encounters with UFOs and craft, but I don't think a lot of the lights in the sky that people see are actual UFOs.
Have you dealt with a lot of abductees or people that have actually been taken by one of these?
Oh yes, I just wrote a book not long ago about this, experiencers and abductees. I've been working with a particular gentleman and his family for almost a decade now, who are abducted through portals as opposed to going onto alien craft. Most abductions recently, let's put it that, when I say recently, the past couple of decades, there has been more portal abduction as opposed to UFO abduction. I think these beings have the ability to project that they're taking people on actual craft as opposed to taking them somewhere else or actually being there at their own location. But it varies. I mean, there's a lot of different type of phenomena.
He said it used to be different to where they weren't using portals. How was it different in the past?
Well, they did seem to be more inclined to take a person from the location and be able to place them into a craft where the abductees would state that they thought they were on a craft, they're seeing something. It could have been an illusion, it could have been actual, but you don't hear about that as much as you used to.
The beings that they encounter, from the cases that you've been working with, are they similar? Are they very different beings that are being recorded? And what are some other recurring themes with this UFO phenomenon that you find you're coming across?
Well, the earlier abduction experiencer scenarios up into about the mid-90s were mostly dealing with gray type aliens, all shapes and sizes, but there was usually a human type hybrid or alien involved with that as well. A lot of these abductions include human type entities, but recently it's kind of evolved to a point where now most abductions include several types of species. There are always the grays, but occasionally there's a reptilian involved, a reptoid-like being, also human hybrids. And in some other occasions, there are other beings that are hard to recognize, or in fact, there are some that even look like insectoid. So there do seem to be more of these beings involved now. They do seem to be working together to a degree. But we do get more of that now.
More and more researchers are also jumping on the theory that it's possibly wormholes that they're using for their craft and not just traveling millions and millions of miles through the solar system and through the galaxy to get different places. It would make a lot more sense that they'd be able to just jump from one location to another than travel that long distance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think they do. I think it's a lot easier. I mean, the string theory, it seems like something as far as wormholes is something that could be utilized by these alien races. Talking about intergalactic, interstellar travel. I don't think that really occurs as much as people think or want to think it does. But I think, like you said, portal or wormhole travel is much more prevalent.
In a lot of these abduction cases, a lot of the researchers that I've spoken with and even abductees have said that there's always some sort of breeding or hybridization program going on in the background, or they're actually being experimented on where they're taking their fetuses and they're impregnating them somehow. Is this something you've encountered in your investigations?
Yes, I have. I've been involved with the cases where females have actually lost pregnancies on numerous occasions at the end of around the first trimester after 3 months, where they would be pregnant. A doctor would state they were pregnant. All the tests showed they were pregnant, and then the pregnancy suddenly ends with no fetus. I have one individual who I have been working with who's had this happen to her 6 times. And I've also had several male abductees and experiencers who have known that they have bred with other non-terrestrial entities and have been shown children that they know instinctively are theirs. So it doesn't happen on all occasions, but it does happen.
Wow, any theories on what could be going on there? I've had some theories anywhere from they're trying to actually repopulate our planet with these hybrids to, any other crazy type of experiments that they're doing. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't know. I kind of go to a couple ways on this. I think they do want to eventually form some type of biological or technological synchronicity with us. But then again, if they wanted to invade us or do something like that, they wouldn't have been as subtle about it, I don't believe. There's a particular reason why they're doing this. It's either to strengthen their DNA line or something else. But, quite frankly, it's an enigma. It's something that we really have no idea what's going on. And, until we get further evidence, I really don't like to come up with any theories about it.
Right. Now let's talk about cryptids. For those that don't know, a cryptid can be anything that's not categorized by mainstream science, any kind of being or unknown being. Isn't that right?
Yep, that's the correct definition.
So tell us, what type of cryptid beings have you either encountered or you have investigated?
Well, I've kind of investigated everything, to be quite honest with you, but I've had 2 personal encounters. Back in '81, I had an encounter with a Bigfoot-like creature in an area of Sykesville, Maryland. And in 1988, I had an encounter with what people describe as a Mothman or a winged humanoid near a Boy Scout camp in Adams County, Pennsylvania.
Well, let's start with the Bigfoot. Tell us about that first.
Okay, well, this was in May of 1981. I was fishing, fly fishing on the Patapsco River, South Patapsco River, just south of Sykesville, Maryland, about a mile away. It was in the morning, about 10 a.m. in the morning, nice sunny day. And I was in an area which I had been in before, where I have fly fished before. I was on the south bank near where some of the water flattens out. It was a little deep, but I noticed a mixed breed dog sniffing around the weeds and thickets on the north bank. I say it was probably 40 to 50 yards away from me. And he was just weaving it out of the brush, so I just paid him no mind. So I concentrated on fishing. Now, after a few minutes or so, I heard the dog barking and growling. I figured he stirred up a deer or something. But when I looked in the direction of where the noise was coming from, I noticed a dark, hairy creature bobbing up and down the thickets. So I stopped fishing, tried to move a little bit in the water. I had chest waders on. And suddenly I heard a loud yelp from the dog. And this creature stood up. Now, the best I could tell was it was about 7 to 8 foot in height, had dark matted hair, but I could only see the body from the chest up because the rest of the body was obscured by weeds and thickets. I stood completely still, but I could hear some ticking sounds, which were coming from the direction. And I later discovered that this being was probably gnashing its teeth and making a ticking sound. So having these waders on, I really couldn't move a whole bunch. This thing turned and walked towards my left out of the weeds, stood facing me in full body. You could definitely tell it was a male because I could see the genitalia. And he turned around and started walking up in the woods. He wasn't running, but he was moving at a pretty good clip. Be honest with you, I've described this thing as looking like a Neanderthal. It looked a lot human, but it had hair all over its, except for the kind of sparse in the chest. The face had no hair, but that's what I thought it looked like. Thought it looked more human. So I quickly walked up to my car and got in. I was going to make a report because I didn't know what this thing was at the time. I mean, back in '81, of course, people had heard about Bigfoot and down in the Falcon Monster and such, but it wasn't a real big thing back there, and I really didn't know what I was dealing with. But I did know the name Bigfoot, so I figured that's what it was. So I drove to the nearest telephone, which was located outside of a bar along the river. I called the local police. They told me to go back to the area and someone would meet me there. Well, I tell you, it only took me 3 to 4 minutes to get back over there because it was a fairly short distance, and a state police officer was already there. And when I pulled up, he told me to turn around and get back out of there. There was there was a situation going on. I told him that I had made the call. He said, I don't care. Just turn around and get out of here. So I had to go back home. I actually lived in Sykesville at the time. So about an hour later, I went ahead and drove back. And by that time, the place was crawling with people. It was, I had to park like a quarter mile away just on the road to walk up there. And when I walked up there, there was at that time, a Howard County policeman standing there. I asked him what was going on, just plain dumb, and he said, somebody said they saw Bigfoot. Well, I didn't let on. I was the one that made the call, but there were people with dogs going in and out of the weeds and into the woods. They had a big white tent set up across the river already. They had, at that time, these black vehicles, old GMC vehicles. They weren't SUVs or anything, but it was definitely government. It was federal government. And I could hear helicopters. I didn't see one, but I could hear it. And, of course, there were local police, state police. And so apparently they knew something was going on before I even made the report. And in fact, I found out later that there was a sighting that day in several hours before mine downriver of a Bigfoot. But the fact that the police got involved with it, I never did understand what was going on there. I don't know if it was part of some type of government program or experiment. Down there, where I used to live at, in that area, there are a lot of government facilities that people don't know about. And, it's between Baltimore and Washington. And, I never did really know if there was something to do with some type of facility or not. But, I actually called when I got home after making the report. I called the local television stations and told them what I had seen. And they seemed interested in wanting to hear my story. So they told me to call back. And after they get information, about a day or so later, I called them back and none of them wanted to talk to me. So it was being hushed over. So, it bothered me, but I tell you, it got to the point where I had heard later on about a Bigfoot incident, something they called the Sykesville Monster back in the early 70s right after the Tropical Storm Agnes flooding and such. And people had seen this Bigfoot or this Sykesville Monster in several of the residents along the river. So I took it upon myself, even though this is 6 or 7 years later, I took it upon myself to do a lot of interviews of people who had these encounters. And I actually found a few others that hadn't made reports. So, at that point, that was something that really got me started with investigating cryptids.
Very interesting. Now, what about your Mothman experience? Tell us about that.
Okay. This was in 1988. It was in the fall. I had actually come across a friend of mine who I went to high school with. He was a scout leader, and they were at an exhibition down in Baltimore, the old Timonium Fairgrounds. So I just ran into him by accident. So we sat down and we were talking, and he knew that I was a paranormal investigator. And in fact, he had been with me on one small case I did back in the 70s. So he told me, he said, there's been a lot of strange stuff going on at the Camp Conawago lately. Some of the kids have been seeing things. They've been hearing strange noises. And it's been so bad that they've been actually packing up and leaving camp early. So he told me, he said, look, he said, a friend of mine and I are going out there next weekend. And, if you'd like to come along, I'd be more than welcome to have you. So I decided, yeah, I'll go ahead and tag along. So it was actually the next weekend. I met them, and it was a Friday. It was a late Friday afternoon. So we got out to the camp, walked into the woods. I guess we were about 500 yards away from the administration building that was there. Got deep into the woods, were up along the Conawago Creek. And, we set up tents. We had 3 tents, had a good fire going. And it was about 7 p.m. by that time. We stuck around the campsite just talking and catching up on things, sitting there hoping we'd hear something. The first night was pretty uneventful, though, I had to sense something was going on. I just couldn't pinpoint it. So I didn't say anything. And, when we were sitting around the campfire in the morning eating, my friend had told me, he said, did you hear footsteps in the campsite last night? And I heard it, but I just thought it was one of them going to the latrine or something. And, but apparently nobody had gotten up, so we didn't know what it was. Anyway. So that day we went ahead and went out into the woods. I guess we were out there about 4 or 5 hours. And we may have hiked 10, 12 miles that whole day trying to see if we could find any evidence of anything. The area itself is pretty thick. It's kind of virgin woods. Got a lot of animals there. So, we got back to camp about 6 p.m. and sat down and started talking. about every little thing that came to our heads. You know, later we ate later that evening, sit around actually talk about football, when suddenly, and this was about 11 o'clock, suddenly we heard a scream coming downstream from our location. Now, I thought it sounded like an owl at first, but a few minutes later, it happened again, and it distinctively sounded like a child screaming. So I couldn't tell how far away it was, but it lasted for several seconds. It seemed to fade in and out. So we got up, walked a few yards into the woods, expecting to hear the sound again, but it was quiet for about an hour. So we went back, sat down, decided to stay up for the rest of the night. You know, a lot of animals in the woods can make a lot of different sounds, but quite frankly, none of them can cry like a child. So it was a full moon that night, or close to a full moon, and the woods and creek were very visible. So we sat there. We weren't drinking all that weekend, and we sat. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I decided to get up and walk perimeter to camp when I kind of felt something was watching us. You know, you just get that feeling. I stood still, tried to gauge what it was. I got back. I told them that I felt something, and I said, let's go ahead and go up the trail a little bit, see what's going on. So we got our flashlights, started walking one in front of the other. We didn't get more than maybe 50 foot out of the campsite, and we noticed something standing in the creek, and the first thing that grabbed our attention were the red eyes. And I mean, it was just like two lights, and it was, you know, and by the time we got the flashlights on this thing, it just suddenly swooshed quickly up into the air. And then we heard a screaming sound fade away as it was going away from us. From what we did see, it was very dark in color. It did look like it had some type of wing structure on its back, but it was hard to tell. Two of us noticed that, but the fact that it would jettison so quickly without spreading its wings was just really, really interesting. So we heard back to the campsite. My friend, he was shook. I mean, he didn't talk for several minutes until I prodded him and asked him what he saw. The other guy was pretty calm, and he estimated it was about 6 foot tall or so, and he saw the structures on the back. So we all agreed it had red eyes and that it jettisoned without any type of wings, though we thought it did have wings. So the one guy they wanted to leave. So what they did, they packed their stuff up and went up to the administration building and stayed the rest of the night up there. But I wanted to see what it was. I was hoping to come back, so I stayed up the rest of the night. But, you know, it was uneventful. Nothing else happened. So, you know, I had been aware of the Mothman sightings in West Virginia for years. I knew about the situation, so-called harbinger of doom thing at the Silver Bridge, and the sightings for the year around that, 66 and 67. But I later did, I didn't really say much about it, and I didn't publish the actual encounter until I started doing the blog. And that was about 15 years later. I had actually sat down and wrote out what had happened, put it on the blog. And I got a response from a gentleman who lived near where we had the sighting. And he said for years he'd been hearing those screaming sounds and had no idea what it was. And then later, I got another email from a gentleman who was a scout leader who said that just a few weeks previous to that, he and his troop had been out camping at Camp Conawago, and the kids were freaked out because they saw what they called a dragon on the trail. And he just thought they were screwing with him. So, but they said it was a dragon, that it had feathers but their description was so odd. So he just thought they were playing around. But after he read read my encounter, he he decided he'd contact me, and ever since that time, the people in the area call it old red eyes. So I don't know how many people have seen it. I have received 5 other sighting reports, not particularly in the area of the camp, but downriver or downstream. And occasionally somebody sees it. My last sighting report was 3 years ago. But the being itself is very similar and characteristic, and as the sightings in Chicago, and somewhat like the Mothman at Point Pleasant.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. They've actually had more recent sightings in Chicago.
Yeah.
Was that being described as the same type of being that you saw?
Well, there have been different descriptions. It was interesting. The first sighting that was received was of a 6 to 7 foot tall being. It was reported in Oz Park by an attorney who was walking her dog. It had large wings that actually extended above the back, above the head of this being. It described it almost like the Mothman with the large butterfly or moth-like wings, and it had red eyes. And this thing turned and looked at her and suddenly jettisoned in the air without flapping its wings. And when it reached the apex, it screamed out and took off. So we were receiving or hearing about other sightings in Chicago. Most of the sightings at that time, the second, third, and fourth sighting were what people called an owlman or lacusa. Feathered wings, possibly, with red eyes, and same body structure. But as time went on, most of the sightings, if not all the sightings after that, and we've had since late winter of 2017, we've had 85 sightings in Chicago or within a 200-mile radius of Chicago. But most of the sightings were of a dark 5 to 6 foot humanoid-like being with legs, arms attached to the wings and some detached from the wings. And the wings were always the shape of that, like a bat or a gargoyle-like being, a membraned wing, and the head was small. Some had red eyes, some didn't. The body was very thin, emaciated looking, and very rarely did this thing was seen flapping its wings. So, and the sightings themselves were fairly fleeting, because they would suddenly show up, somebody would see it, and by the time they got a camera out to take a picture of it, the thing's gone. So we did get one very indiscernible picture. We've had a lot of sketches done. But, all in all, these beings all looked alike. And I have, after I wrote the book back in the end of 2017, at that time, I believe there were at least 3 of these beings that were coming in and out, because, in fact, we had the same sighting on 2 occasions in different parts of the city around the same time. So I believe there were 2 different sightings. 3 different beings and different sightings. And the sightings, were as far as mid-Indiana, down into mid-central Illinois, up into southern Wisconsin. So, earlier, most of the sightings were in the Chicago metro area, but they have branched out. And more recently, we're beginning to sight a lot of sightings up in Wisconsin and Indiana. So it seems to be spreading out.
Were there any reports of the same type of scream that you heard coming from the one you saw?
Yeah, there were a few.
Very interesting. Now, the sightings are they similar to the original Point Pleasant sightings from the 60s?
Just to a certain degree. Most of them weren't as aggressive as the Mothman at Point Pleasant. Like I said before, there were a few that had the red eyes. The head seemed to be a little bit smaller and not part of the body as the Mothman was. The wings were different and the body was different, just much more thinner. Now, we did have a few encounters that seemed somewhat aggressive, but, it didn't chase anybody to the degree that the Point Pleasant Mothman did.
So any thoughts on what it possibly could be? Is it some sort of spirit or other entity, shapeshifter, something like that?
I believe it's an interdimensional being. I believe at some point it was possibly summoned there for whatever reason. Of course, people started believing that it was a harbinger or a portent of some type of disaster that was going to happen in the future. I never got that feeling and never got that inclination, though. In the summer 2017, I was literally having 20 to 25 people per day calling me because they were so fearful of what this thing may do. I mean, it really got to the point. I mean, I wasn't getting a lot of sleep at all.
Are there any entities that you've researched that would be considered sort of harbingers of doom?
No, I wouldn't say necessarily there are. The Mothman at Point Pleasant, I never really thought was a harbinger as well. I think for the fact that they had the bridge collapse where 46 people passed away in a small town, that it was something used as an excuse for what happened, because there were a lot of sightings of this thing. And, there have been several instances where people were saved, for the most part, after the fact, that they saw some type of winged being after a disaster right before it. Chernobyl is a perfect example. They called it the Blackbird of Chernobyl, that they saw large bird-like being that used to fly over the Chernobyl site just before it had the meltdown. So I don't, there have been other instances, but I don't really buy into that.
Have you come across a lot of instances where it is like an entity that's being summoned by maybe someone that wants to get revenge or something like that? Have you come across that?
Well, I've thought for a long time that the Point Pleasant Mothman was a summoned being. I have talked to several experiencers who have been to the West Virginia Ordnance Works, where this being was seen many times, who have received a lot of very, very interesting EVPs and have had a lot of strange experiences in that area, which I do believe was possibly a Native American spirit of some type, and that this Mothman being was a summoned sentry or some kind of sentinel. There have been a lot of encounters since that time as well, all through Mason County and counties around there. So, I think it has a lot to do with the history, and that the very heavy spiritual presence there may have been responsible for this thing showing up.
Now, I'd like to talk about Bigfoot for a minute. One of the biggest questions that I have, and probably every other researcher has, is how are they so elusive? How is it that people can hear them and they'll be throwing rocks and they'll be so close, but they can never get a good picture or video of these things?
Well, I think for the most part they're very elusive because of their instincts, for one thing. I do believe that there are actually flesh and blood indigenous pods of these creatures, in particular the Pacific Northwest up into Canada, parts of eastern Texas, some of the southern reaches along the coast, along the Gulf, and down into Florida, where what people call the skunk ape. I think there are actually indigenous Bigfoot, but I also believe that most of the other sightings that people have are of an interdimensional or possibly non-terrestrial being. And the reason I say that is there have been so many instances where people report that they have followed tracks and that suddenly end, or that they would see it vanish, or that, it would just, it would actually act like it was some type of non-flesh and blood creature, the way it reacted. Sometimes people see it, are unable, you see the photographs, they're always blurred. Very rarely do you get one that's very distinctive. There are a lot of different factors. Stan Gordon has been talking for years about the Chestnut Ridge, and that the beings, the Bigfoot-like beings that are seen in that area, a lot of times are accompanied by craft or alien sightings, or possibly orb sightings, and that continues to this day. There are a lot of reports that we have investigated where when you go out and you talk to the witnesses or go to the location, orb sightings were usually a part of it. So, and these orb sightings, this is nationwide. People talk about this as well, and that they've seen UFOs. So I do believe that there are certain areas where they very well can be an indigenous species, but I believe for the most part that these beings are interdimensional, as most cryptids, I believe, are.
Any thoughts on why there's never been any remains found of these creatures?
Well, because if it's an area where they are indigenous, they're very good at hiding the body or getting rid of it, or that nature takes its course. Where I believe that they're interdimensional, they're taken out and taken to where they originally came from somehow. There's no real good answer for it. There have been hair samples found. Some of the DNA in some of these hair samples are very curious. So who knows? I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of places in a lot of years, and there's no real good answer. But I tell you, I know what I saw, and that thing was flesh and blood. But I couldn't say for a fact that it wasn't an interdimensional being.
Do you believe that they're benevolent beings? And have you ever heard of any Bigfoot attacking people?
There have been rumors of attacks being somewhat aggressive. The Ape Canyon incident many years ago is one where sometimes it seems like they get a group of them together, they may become aggressive, especially if they are injured in some fashion. But rarely does that happen. There have been instances where people swear that they've been chased through the woods by these things, and there have been people who said they took shots at these things with guns and it never seemed to affect them. So, I think for the most part, they just want to remain hidden.
One of these creatures that I'm not very familiar with, I've just kind of recently heard a little about, is the Dog Man.
Uh-huh.
Tell us a little bit more about that and what some of the locations that this being's been seen in.
Well, here in Pennsylvania, we've been involved with the upright, what we call upright canine sightings, dogman sightings for the most part are quadrupeds. The upright canines are bipeds. The sightings that we have received, and at this point right now, we have gotten 26 sightings in Pennsylvania since 2014 when we started investigating, Butch Wachowski and myself. Most of the reports that we receive are of a tall, very tall, lichen-like creature with the head of a wolf, a very muscular body with human-like arms and claws, legs that are usually hocked like that of a canine, and very thin waist and torso, but very thick chest. And the descriptions are pretty hard to believe, but I tell you, we've gotten some very credible people telling us about these sightings, including 2 Pennsylvania Game Commission officers. So something's out there. Now, I don't, again, are they interdimensional? You know, some of the sightings we have gotten were of, you know, when people would see this thing, it kind of had that kind of supernatural look to it, kind of a hazy look. But in most cases, it's a very solid flesh and blood being. And, you know, we've had hunters come across these things, and for whatever reason, I don't know, it's because of what this being projects, but they just do not take a shot at it. They're so frightened, shocked by it, that they just don't take a shot at it.
Has there been any attacks, like animal attacks or human attacks by this creature?
We haven't had any human attacks. Of course, we've seen people have described them killing deer and such. But as far as humans, no, they do seem aggressive at some points. But, you know, and they do stand their ground. They won't run off. That's another thing. I think if they're cornered, they'll come after you. So, you know, I don't know exactly what this thing is. They do seem on occasion to actually migrate. We have a theory that here in Pennsylvania that they actually do move north and south between central Pennsylvania into western Maryland, down into West Virginia, and back on occasion. But, you know, there's not a whole lot of evidence to support that. But other than being a lot of sightings on certain ridges and such, we really don't know. There have been a fair amount of sightings along the area of the Appalachian Trail and within Pennsylvania. Now, as far as other states, we really haven't gotten a whole lot of information for it being in it along the trail. But for years, there have also been Bigfoot sightings along the trail as well. So who knows? I mean, but the upright canine dogman sightings have been very prevalent in the upper Midwest as well, particularly in Wisconsin and Michigan, and we've had sightings reported to us in southern Ontario. So, you know, I've had sightings. In fact, recently I've had sightings down in and around the Birmingham, Alabama areas as well. So they are out there. People are seeing these things, so who knows what they are.
I wonder if it's possible that if these beings aren't coming into our reality, but we're just kind of getting glimpses of another dimension or another reality. Have you ever thought about that?
That's possible. I mean, we really do not know much about the thinning of the veil and how to travel between realities. You know, there's been a lot of speculation about it, but we really don't know a whole lot. You know, are really what these other realities contain. You know, like I said, it's been a lot of speculation and theory, but I do believe that it does involve something similar to that, and the fact that we don't have bodies or a whole lot of evidence. It's you know, years and years ago, when some of us used to talk about the interdimensional theory as far as Bigfoot goes, you know, we used to get just shunned away by the Bigfoot community. But frankly, in recent years, there have been a lot more of the diehards realizing that they got to start keeping an open mind because something's up.
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you about one of my local legends. I'm in South Louisiana, and down here we have the Rougarou. Have you ever heard of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of it. We've had some upright canine sightings down in Louisiana, but you know, is the Rougarou something else? Is it a werewolf? Is it an upright canine? You know, it could be a lot of different things, but yeah, I've heard about it.
Do you think that we're experiencing more sightings now just because we have this technology, the equipment, cameras, and the internet? Or do you think this phenomenon is occurring more?
That's a question I get asked a lot. I think it has a lot to do with the internet and, you know, technology and such. And of course, a lot of these shows on TV, people seem to be more open to talking about it. I got a lot of reports. So, you know, you got to separate the wheat from the chaff. But, you know, of course, you do get that report occasionally that really sticks out. But I don't know. It's an interesting question. There very well could be some more the phenomena could be more intense now than it used to be. I'll be honest with you. I used to do a lot of hunting when I was younger, and I was out in the woods all the time. I'd be a little more hesitant to go out there nowadays, to be honest with you.
Very interesting. Now, a final question. What are your thoughts on what's going on with UFO and extraterrestrial disclosure now with all the leaks, you know, from military leaks, and then they have the whole Area 51 raid, and it just seems like the whole alien thing is just blowing up everywhere. Do you think this is a controlled, slow type of disclosure thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're being spoon-fed. I think it kind of reached the point to where there have been so many questions about what has been going on, why the government just seems not to be interested in revealing any information. As far as entities, they're going to keep quiet on that. But as far as the UFO sightings and reports, if it's a military sighting that they feel that they can disclose, then they'll do it. But beyond that, I just don't think they're going to say anything unless they have to eventually.
Why do you think they're more tight-lipped when it comes to the, I guess, spiritual or interdimensional phenomenon than it is with the UFOs?
Well, it has a lot to do, I think, with cooperation. I think they know about them. I think they are part of an agenda. But they probably have done some things and gotten in some situations where the public probably wouldn't be too happy about it. You know, there are lots of theories and such, you know, about deep underground facilities and cooperation with alien entities. And, you know, you hear all about that. You wonder how true it is. But, you know, if you want to call it the deep state, yeah, you can call it the deep state, but I think there's some type of connection to where it's just impossible for them to come out and tell us.
I agree. And Lon, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. That was awesome information, and we'll have to have you back on again.
Thanks for having me.